A very good morning and welcome back. You're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. EU anti-crime agencies Europol and Eurojust announced they dismantled a pro-Russian cybercrime network responsible for attacks on critical infrastructure in Europe. The network, known as No Name 057, was dismantled after authorities conducted 24 raids in 12 countries between July 14th and 17th. European authorities allege that the hacking group carried out 73 DOS attacks per day, at first targeting Ukraine and later shifting focus to Kyiv's allies in the EU and NATO. The investigation led to 2 arrests, one in France and another in Spain. Authorities also issued 7 arrest warrants targeting 6 individuals in Russia, including 2 who have been identified as central figures in the criminal network. The group had over 100 computers at its disposal, which have been taken offline by EU authorities along with the group's central server infrastructure. The European Union is still wrangling over its 18th package of sanctions against Russia, which has so far been blocked by Slovakia. Our correspondent Alex Cadier has been following this for us and has more.
Well, a frustrating day here in Brussels for those member states, for those countries wanting to hinder Russia's ability to prosecute its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, wanting to reduce Russia's ability to make money from gas export, from fossil fuel exports to the European Union. Of course, this 18th package of sanctions would include a ban on the use of the Nord Stream pipelines. It would reduce the price cap set by the European Union to $45 a barrel for oil, of course, trying to hurt the Russian economy, trying to slow down the Russian government's ability to pay for its war. Also, the shadow fleet that Russia uses to sell this oil, more vessels from that fleet would be added to the sanction list. More than 20 new Russian banks would have been added to the sanction list, as well as other Russian financial institutions being targeted. 26 countries in the European Union supporting, 1 blocking. Robert Fico, the Slovak Prime Minister, saying he now wants his country to be exempted from the phase-out of the ban on Russian fossil fuels, and he wants to be able to honor the contract his country has with Gazprom, the energy giant from Russia, until 2034. Now, Kaja Kallas, the EU's top diplomat, said this is moving the goalposts. She said that the Commission had given the concessions that Slovakia had asked for, had negotiated in good faith. They were very close to convincing Slovakia, and at the last minute, the Slovak Prime Minister decided to change the game. As I said, a frustrating day for those member states here in Brussels who were for these sanctions. A confusing, bemusing day for those Ukrainians wondering why it is taking so long. But for now, they are back at the negotiating table. No agreement on this 18th package of sanctions. And perhaps the ambassadors will have to go back to the drawing board, back to the negotiating table in a couple of days still. For now, we wait. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadier for TVP World.
The European Commission plans to spend big on its next long-term budget, with defense and supporting Ukraine identified as major winners in the €2 trillion pool of cash. So which portfolio or portfolios lost out? More from our EU correspondent Angela Skujins.
The winners and losers of the €2 trillion pitch as part of the European Commission's multi-annual financial framework have already been identified. Now, the EU executive proposed the policy measure on Friday, with security and defence set to see a major boon. Now, €131 billion at least has been earmarked for these portfolios, with Ukraine also set to gain €100 billion. However, a loser has been identified. This is the agricultural as well as cohesion policies, now set to gain only €865 million. But what we're hearing from officials in Warsaw, that despite this shortfall, the country still will see the highest amount of cohesion funds entering its coffers.
I do expect that Central European countries, including Poland, will fight for higher cohesion spending. Other countries like France, Denmark, but also Central Europeans will also try to fight for greater agricultural spending. It will be the result of these complex political negotiations and positions, because ultimately the EU budget has to be approved by unanimously. Every EU country has to agree. They have veto power. So they must find compromises to be able to pass the budget.
So that was the Hungarian academic there, Zsolt Davis, talking about those Central European countries expected to fight for their pool of cash. We've already heard reaction regarding this proposal from the European Commission, that's the EU executive, particularly from Hungary, with that country's Prime Minister Viktor Orban voicing his criticism of that money earmarked to support Ukraine's recovery and resilience to what he says is a cost of those agricultural farmers and workers in that sector. But we know that the budget will take at least 2 years to get over the line. It is set for fierce debate in the European Parliament before it heads to the European Council and requires unanimous support from those 27 EU member states to cross the line. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Despite the EU's proposed budget for the years 2028 to 2034 being almost 2 trillion euros, the agriculture sector will receive less funding than in previous multi-year financial frameworks. In an interview with TVP World, Piotr Arak, chief economist at Velobank, said the move is likely to stir up controversy among farmers who have already been on edge for the last few years regarding EU policies.
If agriculture is going to remain 300 million, that means it's by a quarter smaller than in the previous multi-financial framework. So it means that, for example, the agricultural sector in Poland or in Bulgaria, Romania, in France is going to receive less money than it is receiving right now. And we saw a lot of tension in the agricultural sector throughout the last 2 or 3 years after the entrance of Ukraine to the single market after the war, and the goods coming from Ukraine, and the additional tensions if those same businesses, those same farmers are not receiving the same amount of money that they were in the previous years. It means that, this could be very problematic for the governments that will support this.
President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that the letters sent to foreign countries notifying them of new tariff rates should be considered as deals. The tariff letters are not due to take effect until August 1st, giving room for more negotiations to take place. If negotiations fail, the White House says the tariffs will kick in at the stated rate.
When I send out a letter, that's a deal. In other words, that's a deal. They don't want to ever say that. Oh, how many deals have you made? The best deal we can make is to send out a letter. And the letter says that you'll pay 30%, 35%, 25%, 20%, in one case 50%. Brazil, we'll have well over 150 countries that we're just going to send a notice of payment out, and the notice of payment is going to say what the tariff, and it's all going to be the same for everyone, for that group. They don't, they're not big countries, and they don't do that much business. It's not like the ones that we've agreed with, like China, like Japan, where we're negotiating with them, but I think probably we'll live by the letter with Japan.
More than 40% of Czechs believe the European Union might interfere in the country's parliamentary election come October, a survey by the Central European Digital Media Observatory has shown. The figures indicate that the Czechs consider the EU almost as big a threat to its election as Russia. This resonates with the Czech Republic's growing Euroscepticism, as a mere 29% of the country's population view the European Union positively compared to the bloc-wide average of 43%. Similar sentiment is seen in other countries in the region. 46% of people in Slovakia consider the EU the biggest election interference threat, which is more than Russia, while in Poland, the EU is deemed the second biggest threat to the electoral process, only 8 percentage points behind Russia. The Czech Republic's election will be held in early October, with opposition right-wing populist Andrej Babiš and his party ANO currently polling well ahead of the largest group in the ruling coalition, Spolu, led by Prime Minister Petr Fiala. Late Wednesday evening, Russia launched airstrikes on the town of Dobropilia in Ukraine's Donetsk region. At least 2 people were confirmed to have been killed by the attack, with 28 others wounded. According to local reports, Russia launched a 500-kilogram guided aerial bomb at a busy commercial district in the city, damaging 54 retail outlets, 304 apartments and 13 residential buildings and 8 vehicles. Local authorities say the attack took place during peak hours when many civilians were at the shopping center. Emergency services continue working on the site of the attack, looking for victims and tending to the wounded. The strike was condemned by President Volodymyr Zelensky, who called it an example of, quote, horrendous, dumb Russian terror lacking any military logic. Russian propaganda is framing the attack on civilian infrastructure in Vinnytsia, Ukraine, as a strike aimed at destroying an arms manufacturing facility. The director of terrorism research at Civitas University, Paulina Piasecka, says, however, that the recent Russian attack deliberately targeted a Polish floorboard factory.
But we do need to take into account also the fact that the Russian propaganda boasts hitting the foreign facility that actually produce weapons. That's not to say that this is true. This is a terrifying attack against the civilian infrastructure, but this is the way in which it is being framed and sort of sold to the Russian citizens, that the Russian government and Russian military are targeting the cover-ups for the foreign production of arms and weapons for Ukraine.
The German Ministry of Defense on Wednesday evening contradicted the U.S. president on Patriot shipments to Ukraine. While the U.S. President Donald Trump claimed the famous Patriots were on their way to Kyiv, the German Defense Ministry said it had no knowledge of such shipments. In an interview with the Swiss public broadcaster, a spokesperson for the German Ministry of Defense said he does not know of any shipments currently en route to Ukraine. The spokesperson added that such questions will be answered at the meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group scheduled for July 21st. According to the spokesperson, the meeting will revolve around implementing the delivery of Patriot systems to Ukraine as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, President Trump said on July 16th that Patriot air defense missiles bound for Ukraine are already making their way to Kyiv, just days after unveiling a new NATO coordinated arms initiative for the country. An administrative court in Riga has ruled that the Latvian media controller acted illegally when taking away TV Rain's broadcasting license. In December of 2022, the Latvian media controller canceled the license after TV Rain, an independent Russian language channel, broadcast maps showing Crimea as part of Russia and called the Russian army our soldiers. According to the presiding judge, the decision by the National Court of Electronic Media was issued illegally. TV Rain was abruptly banned in Russia in March 2022 when Russian authorities claimed the station inaccurately reported the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The station then moved to the neighboring Latvia. According to the Latvian court, maps portraying Crimea as part of Russia were not used in a geopolitical context and cannot be considered as evidence of the outlet's wrongdoing. Moreover, the courts in Riga pointed out that just before the license was taken away, TV Rain made significant steps to provide a Latvian language version of its broadcasts. Italy on Friday will mark a significant political milestone, the 1,000th day of Giorgia Meloni's government, making it one of the longest-serving cabinets in the country's post-war history. Meloni's right-wing coalition is becoming a rare example of political stability in a country that has often faced frequent government changes. Over the past 2 decades, Italy has seen 11 different governments with frequent changes and short-lived coalitions. Despite this current stability, signs of fatigue are emerging in Meloni's administration as recent polling reveals a drop in public approval. Only 34% of Italians are satisfied with the government's performance, while 62% expressed dissatisfaction, with the most unpopular minister being Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini. However, Meloni's right-wing party, Brothers of Italy, continues to lead in the polls with nearly 30% support, followed by the center-left Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement. This political stability is accompanied by Italy's desire to take a greater role in the reconstruction of Ukraine, as evidenced by a recent conference in Rome focusing on the post-war recovery efforts. Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa declared that protecting Druze citizens and their rights is a top priority for the government. It was his first public statement following Wednesday's Israeli strikes on targets in Damascus. The Israeli strikes on Syria, including strike on its defense ministry, captured live on local TV, come amid escalating violence in the country's southern Slovakia province, where deadly clashes have erupted between local Druze communities and Sunni Bedouins. Eyewitnesses report that Syrian government forces have joined the fighting, allegedly carrying out executions, looting, and arson. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims the strikes are aimed at protecting the Druze minority. In response to the violence, Israel has reinforced its military presence along the Syrian border. Meanwhile, Druze citizens in Israel, typically loyal to the state, have declared a strike and are calling for aid for their relatives across the border. And so this would be all the latest news updates for now. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features.